The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grandeville Hotel, each droplet catching the glow of the chandeliers inside. Isabella Santos adjusted her black uniform for the 10th time that evening, her hands trembling slightly as she balanced the silver tray laden with crystal champagne flutes. 24 years old and working 3 jobs to pay for nursing school, she had seen her share of wealthy clients. But nothing quite like this. The charity gala was the most exclusive event of the season. Manhattan's elite mingled beneath gold-leafed ceilings, their laughter mixing with the soft melody of the string quartet. Isabella weaved through the crowd, her green eyes scanning the room as she served drinks to women dripping in diamonds and men whose single watches could pay her tuition for a year. "Excuse me, miss." A woman with perfectly styled silver hair beckoned Isabella over. "Could you please refill our table?" Isabella nodded, making her way toward the corner where several influential guests sat discussing business ventures and political connections. As she approached, she caught fragments of their conversation: stock prices, real estate acquisitions, the usual wealthy small talk. But then something changed. 2 men stepped away from the main group, moving toward the terrace that overlooked the city. Something about their demeanor made Isabella pause. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing around nervously before sliding open the glass door. Isabella knew she shouldn't listen. Every instinct told her to mind her own business, serve the drinks, and collect her paycheck. But curiosity won. She positioned herself near the terrace door, pretending to organize glasses while straining to hear their conversation. "The shipment arrives Thursday," one man said, his accent thick and unfamiliar. "Port Authority, Warehouse 17. My employer expects full payment upon delivery. Tell Petrov he'll get his money when we verify the merchandise." The second man replied coldly, "These weapons better be worth what we're paying." Isabella's blood turned to ice. Weapons. They were discussing illegal arms deals right here, in the middle of Manhattan's most prestigious charity event. Her hands began to shake more violently, the crystal glasses clinking together on her tray. She needed to leave. Now. But as she turned to retreat, her elbow caught the edge of a decorative plant stand. The impact sent her tray tumbling, crystal champagne flutes exploding against the marble floor in a symphony of destruction. The sound echoed through the ballroom like gunshots, causing every conversation to halt and every head to turn. Isabella dropped to her knees, frantically trying to collect the shattered pieces, her face burning with embarrassment. But it wasn't the judgmental stares of the wealthy patrons that made her heart race. It was the deadly silence from the terrace. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to no one in particular, her voice barely audible over the returning conversations of the guests, who had already dismissed the incident as clumsy help. That's when she felt it, the weight of someone's gaze burning into her soul. Isabella looked up slowly, her eyes traveling across the room until they met the most intense stare she had ever encountered. A man stood near the main entrance, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored black suit. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that belonged on magazine covers. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of a stormy ocean. But it wasn't his devastating beauty that made her breath catch. It was the authority that radiated from him, the way other guests stepped aside as he moved, the whispered conversations that followed in his wake. This wasn't just another wealthy attendee. This was someone who commanded respect through fear. Alessandro Romano had been watching the evening's events unfold with calculated interest. At 32, he had learned to read people, situations, and opportunities with lethal precision. He had noticed the nervous Russians discussing business on his terrace. He had observed the pretty waitress listening, where she shouldn't have been listening. And now, as she knelt among broken crystal, her green eyes wide with terror, as she realized the gravity of what she had overheard, Alessandro made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He walked toward her with purposeful strides, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. The crowd parted before him like waves before a ship's bow. Security personnel appeared from shadows, flanking him as he moved. Isabella scrambled to her feet, still clutching pieces of broken glass, small cuts decorating her palms where the crystal had bit into her skin. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like cement. The man approaching her wasn't just handsome. He was dangerous. Everything about him screamed power, control, violence barely contained beneath designer clothing. Alessandro stopped 3 feet away from her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, close enough to see the calculation behind those steel blue eyes. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. He raised one perfectly manicured hand and pointed directly at her, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "You are mine now." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Around them, the wealthy elite continued their conversations as if nothing had happened, but Isabella could feel the undercurrent of tension, the way security moved closer, the way exits suddenly seemed impossibly far away. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alessandro's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You will." 2 men in dark suits appeared at Isabella's elbows, their grip gentle but unmistakably firm. She looked around desperately, seeking help from the other staff members, but they had all mysteriously disappeared. The wealthy patrons continued their conversations, studiously ignoring the drama unfolding in their midst. "Please," Isabella managed, her voice stronger now. "I was just working. I didn't mean to. I know exactly what you meant to do." Alessandro interrupted, his accent carrying the slightest trace of Italian heritage. "And I know what you heard. The question now is what we do about it." Isabella's mind raced. She could deny everything, claim she had heard nothing. But something in Alessandro's eyes told her he would see through any lie she attempted. This man had built an empire on reading people, on knowing when someone posed a threat to his carefully constructed world. "I won't tell anyone," she said quickly. "I swear, I'll forget everything. I just want to go home." Alessandro studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her frightened face to her trembling hands, still bleeding from the crystal cuts. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less commanding. "Home isn't safe for you anymore, Isabella Santos." The use of her name sent chills down her spine. How did he know who she was? How long had he been watching her? "You know things now," he continued, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Things that certain people would kill to keep secret. Things that put a target on your back the moment you heard them." "I don't want to know anything," Isabella protested, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "I just want to finish nursing school and have a normal life." "Normal disappeared the moment you decided to eavesdrop," Alessandro said, though his tone held an unexpected gentleness. "But I'm offering you something better than normal. I'm offering you protection." The men at her elbows tightened their grip slightly, a subtle reminder that this wasn't really a choice. Isabella looked around the ballroom one last time, at the glittering chandeliers, the wealthy patrons, the world of privilege she had been serving but never belonged to. When her eyes met Alessandro's again, she saw something that surprised her. Not cruelty, but genuine concern. Whatever he was, whatever he did, he seemed to truly believe she was in danger. "What if I refuse?" she asked quietly. Alessandro's expression darkened. "Then you leave here alone. And I give you 24 hours before Petrov's men find you. And when they do, they won't be as generous as I'm being." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Isabella nodded slowly, her fate sealed by a moment of curiosity and a tray of broken crystal. As Alessandro's men escorted her toward a private exit, she caught one last glimpse of the glittering ballroom, the world of safety and normalcy disappearing behind her like a dream. Outside, black cars waited in the rain, their engines purring like predatory cats. Alessandro opened the door of the lead vehicle personally, his hand briefly touching her lower back as she climbed inside. "Welcome to my world, Isabella," he said as the door closed between them, sealing her fate. The last thing she saw through the rain-streaked window was the golden glow of the Grandeville Hotel, disappearing into the night, taking her old life with it. The mansion emerged from the darkness like a fortress carved from stone and steel. Isabella pressed her face against the tinted window as they passed through iron gates that stretched 20 feet high, topped with razor wire that gleamed like deadly ribbons in the security lights. The driveway curved through manicured grounds that seemed to stretch for miles, flanked by towering oak trees that whispered secrets to the night wind. "Welcome to the Romano estate," Alessandro said from beside her, his voice carrying a note of pride that seemed entirely at odds with the circumstances. "Your new home." Isabella's stomach lurched. "This isn't my home," I have an apartment in Queens. A life. Responsibilities. Not anymore. His interruption was gentle but absolute. That life ended the moment you heard Viktor Petrov's name mentioned tonight. Do you understand what that means? She turned to study his profile in the dim interior light. At 32, Alessandro Romano possessed the kind of dangerous magnetism that made women forget their own names. His suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair immaculately styled, but there was something predatory in the way he held himself, like a panther masquerading as a house cat. I don't understand any of this, Isabella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know who you are. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. No, but I know everything about you. The car pulled up to the front entrance, where more men in dark suits waited. Isabella counted at least 6, their faces stone-cold professional as they scanned the surrounding darkness. Each one carried themselves with military precision, hands positioned near concealed weapons. Alessandro climbed out first, then extended his hand to help her. His touch was warm, surprisingly gentle, but Isabella could feel the calluses on his palm, evidence of a man who had worked with his hands long before he wore $1,000 suits. The foyer took her breath away. Black marble floors reflected the light from a crystal chandelier that must have cost more than her yearly tuition. The ceiling soared 30 feet above them, decorated with intricate molding that spoke of old-world craftsmanship. Paintings that belonged in museums adorned the walls, their subjects watching with knowing eyes as she was escorted deeper into this world of wealth and power. Marco, Alessandro called, and a man stepped forward from the shadows. Tall and lean with graying temples, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This is Isabella Santos. She'll be staying with us indefinitely. Marco's dark eyes assessed her with the thoroughness of a security scanner. The guest wing, the blue room, and postguards on that floor. Discreet ones. Miss Santos is under my personal protection. Isabella found her voice. I don't need guards. I need to go home. Both men turned to look at her, and she was struck by the similarity in their expressions. Patient, almost paternal, as if she were a child who didn't understand the complexity of adult decisions. Isabella, Alessandro said, removing his suit jacket and draping it over his arm. Beneath the expensive fabric, she could see the definition of muscles earned through more than just gym sessions. Tell me, what do you know about Viktor Petrov? Nothing. I'd never heard that name before tonight. Petrov runs the largest weapons smuggling operation on the East Coast. He also controls human trafficking routes from Eastern Europe, drug distribution networks that span 12 states, and has personally ordered the deaths of over 200 people. Alessandro's voice remained conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. 3 months ago, he put a $5 million bounty on anyone who could provide information about my business operations. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. But I don't know anything about your business. No, but you witnessed his men discussing their next shipment. You heard dates, locations, names. That makes you either an asset or a liability. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. I prefer you as an asset. Marco cleared his throat. Sir, the files you requested. Alessandro took a thick manila folder from his lieutenant's hands and opened it, revealing photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance reports. Isabella's heart stopped when she saw her own face staring back at her from a dozen different angles. Isabella Marie Santos, age 24, Alessandro read aloud. Currently enrolled at Columbia Nursing School, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working 3 part-time jobs to pay tuition. Lives alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on 47th Street in Queens. Rent consistently paid 2 days late but never missed. Parents died in a car accident when she was 16, raised by her uncle Thomas Santos until age 18. Isabella's legs felt weak. When did you? Your uncle Thomas owes money to some very dangerous people. Alessandro continued, his voice softer now. People who would see his debt transferred to you without hesitation. People who wouldn't hesitate to use your nursing skills to patch up their soldiers, or sell you to the highest bidder when your usefulness expired. Uncle Thomas wouldn't, she started, but the conviction died in her throat. Her uncle had always been secretive about his finances, his frequent trips to Atlantic City, the men who sometimes called late at night speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Alessandro closed the file with a sharp snap. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks, Isabella. Not because I intended to involve you in my world, but because your uncle listed you as collateral on his gambling debts. When Petrov's men started asking questions about you, I realized you needed protection whether you wanted it or not." The admission hit her like a physical blow. She was collateral, property to be bartered and traded by men who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. "So you see," Alessandro continued, "this isn't really about what you overheard tonight, though that certainly complicated matters. This is about keeping you alive long enough to find a permanent solution to your uncle's stupidity." Isabella sank onto a nearby chair, her legs finally giving out completely. The elegant furniture felt foreign beneath her. Too rich, too perfect for someone like her. What kind of solution? The kind that ensures Petrov never has reason to think about you again. Alessandro's voice carried a note of finality that made her shiver. "But that will take time to arrange properly. Until then, you're safest here." Marco approached with another file, this one thinner. "The security assessment is complete. Perimeter is clean, but we've identified 3 surveillance points that suggest we're being watched." "Russian? Most likely. Should we deal with them?" Alessandro considered this, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "No. Let them watch for now. I want them to see that she's under my protection. Sometimes the appearance of strength is more valuable than the demonstration of it." Isabella listened to this exchange with growing horror. These men discussed violence and death as casually as others might plan a dinner party. And somehow, she had become a piece on their chessboard, moved around according to strategies she couldn't comprehend. "I want to call my uncle," she said suddenly. "I want to hear this from him." Alessandro and Marco exchanged a look that made her stomach clench. "That might not be possible," Alessandro said carefully. "Why not?" Another long pause. "Because Thomas Santos was found dead in his apartment 6 hours ago." The world tilted sideways. Isabella gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white as she fought to remain conscious. Her uncle, difficult, secretive, frustrating Uncle Thomas, who had raised her after her parents died, was gone. "How?" she whispered. "Professional job. Clean, quick, meant to look like a robbery. But Petrov's signature is all over it." Alessandro knelt beside her chair, his voice gentler than she would have thought possible from a man who commanded such fear. "I'm sorry, Isabella. I truly am." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these dangerous strangers who held her life in their hands. "What happens to me now?" "Now you learn to live in my world," Alessandro said, rising to his full height. "Marco will show you to your room. Tomorrow we'll discuss your new circumstances in detail." As they walked through corridors lined with priceless art and guarded by men with guns, Isabella caught glimpses of the life she was being drawn into. Security monitors showed every angle of the property. Communication equipment that belonged in military installations hummed quietly behind locked doors. This wasn't just a home. It was a command center for an empire built on things she didn't want to understand. Her room was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in shades of blue and silver that somehow managed to be both luxurious and calming. French doors opened onto a balcony that overlooked formal gardens, though she noticed the discreet placement of more security personnel among the landscaping. "The closet has been stocked with appropriate clothing," Marco informed her. "Meals are served in the dining room at 8, 1, and 7. You're free to move about the house and grounds. But please understand that leaving the property without escort isn't permitted." "For how long?" Marco's expression softened slightly. "That depends on factors beyond anyone's immediate control, Miss Santos. But Mr. Romano is a man of his word. If he says you're under his protection, you are." Alone at last, Isabella walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling grounds. Somewhere beyond those walls, people who wanted to hurt her were watching, waiting. Her old life, her apartment, her job, her dreams of becoming a nurse, felt like something that had happened to someone else. Alessandro Romano had saved her life tonight. But in doing so, he had also claimed ownership of it. The question that would haunt her dreams was simple. In a world where everyone was predator or prey, which was she becoming? Isabella woke to the sound of crystal clinking against fine china and the soft murmur of conversation echoing through marble corridors. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. The silk sheets were too smooth, the ceiling too high, the morning light filtering through unfamiliar windows. Then reality crashed back with brutal clarity. Uncle Thomas was dead. Her old life was gone. She was now a prisoner in Alessandro Romano's world, disguised as a protected guest. The closet Marco had mentioned was indeed stocked, with clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. Designer dresses hung beside tailored blazers, while drawers revealed lingerie made from fabrics she couldn't even name. Every piece was exactly her size, which should have been comforting, but instead felt deeply unsettling. How long had they been watching her? How much did they know? Isabella selected the simplest outfit she could find. Dark jeans that probably cost $500, and a cashmere sweater that felt like heaven against her skin. The mirror reflected a stranger back at her, someone who looked like they belonged in this world of wealth and danger. But appearances, she was learning, were often lies wrapped in expensive packaging. Breakfast was served in a dining room that could seat 20, though only 2 places were set at the far end of a mahogany table. Alessandro sat reading what appeared to be financial reports, his dark hair still damp from a shower, wearing a white shirt that emphasized the olive tone of his skin. He looked up when she entered, his steel blue eyes assessing her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Good morning, Isabella. I trust you slept well?" She hadn't slept at all, but admitting that felt like showing weakness. "Well enough, considering the circumstances." "Of course. Please, sit." He gestured to the chair across from him, where fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee waited on bone china that probably cost more than her textbooks. "We have much to discuss." Isabella remained standing, crossing her arms over her chest. "I want to go home. This is kidnapping, Mr. Romano. I don't care what danger you think I'm in. I won't be held prisoner here like some kind of trophy." Alessandro set down his papers with deliberate slowness, his expression shifting from polite host to something far more dangerous. "Kidnapping?" He rose from his chair, moving around the table with predatory grace. "Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it? You took me from my job, brought me here against my will, and now you're telling me I can't leave. That sounds like kidnapping to me." He stopped inches away from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the expensive cologne that clung to his skin. "Very well. You want to leave? The door is there." He pointed toward the dining room entrance. "Walk out. Get in your car. Oh wait, you don't have one here. Call a taxi, except your phone was destroyed for security reasons. Flag down a passing motorist on a private road that sees no traffic." Isabella's confidence wavered, but she refused to back down. "I'll find a way." "I'm sure you will. And approximately 6 hours after you leave this property, Viktor Petrov's men will find you. They'll torture you for information about what you heard at the Gala, then they'll sell you to human traffickers who specialize in young women with medical training. If you're very lucky, they'll kill you quickly when they're done with you." The casual way he described her potential fate made her stomach turn. "You're trying to scare me." "I'm trying to save your life." Alessandro's voice softened slightly. "Isabella, I know this isn't the life you chose, but the moment you overheard that conversation, your choices became very limited. You can stay here, under my protection, and learn to navigate this world. Or you can leave and face certain death." She sank into the chair, the fight draining out of her. "This isn't fair." "No, it's not." Alessandro returned to his seat, pouring coffee from an antique silver service. "Very little about my world is fair, but it's the reality we're both living in now." The coffee was perfect, rich, aromatic, probably imported from some exotic location she'd never heard of. Isabella found herself wondering if she'd ever be able to drink normal coffee again without remembering this moment. What happens now? Now you learn. About my business, about the people who work for me, about the rules that keep everyone alive. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "But first, you eat. You've lost weight since we brought you here, and that's unacceptable." Isabella looked down at the untouched food before her. The fruit was perfectly arranged, the pastries golden and flaky. but her appetite had vanished the moment she learned about her uncle's death. "I'm not hungry. That wasn't a request." The steel returned to his voice. "You're under my protection, which means your well-being is my responsibility. You will eat, you will sleep, and you will take care of yourself. Understood?" The authoritative tone sparked her temper again. "I'm not a child or a pet. You can't just order me around, can't I?" Alessandro's smile was sharp as a blade. "Look around you, Isabella. This is my house, my rules, my world. Everything here exists because I allow it to exist, including you." Before she could respond, Marco entered the dining room carrying a phone. "Sir, urgent call from the port. The Russians made a move on Warehouse 7. Alessandro's entire demeanor changed, the polite host disappearing as the dangerous crime lord emerged. "Casualties? 3 wounded, none killed. They retreated when our reinforcements arrived, but they took photographs of our inventory." "Son of a bitch." Alessandro stood abruptly, his breakfast forgotten. "Double the security on all warehouses. I want a full report in an hour." "Already in progress, sir." As Marco left, Alessandro turned back to Isabella, who had been listening to this exchange with growing horror. This was real. The violence, the danger, the constant threat of war between criminal organizations. It was all real, and she was trapped in the middle of it. "I have to go handle this," Alessandro said, his voice gentler than before. "But I want you to understand something. What just happened? That's why you can't leave. Petrov is escalating, testing my defenses. Every move he makes puts you in more danger." Isabella watched him prepare to leave, checking his weapon, straightening his tie, transforming from a man having breakfast into a commanding general preparing for battle. "How do you live like this? Always looking over your shoulder, never knowing who to trust?" Alessandro paused at the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You learn to trust very few people, and you protect what matters most with everything you have." "What matters most to you?" He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. "Family. Loyalty. The people who depend on me to keep them safe." After he left, Isabella sat alone in the opulent dining room, surrounded by luxury that felt more like a gilded cage with each passing moment. She picked at the fruit, forcing herself to eat despite her churning stomach. Alessandro was right. She needed to maintain her strength if she was going to survive this. The house felt different with Alessandro gone, quieter, but also more tense. She could sense the increased security, the way staff members moved with heightened alertness. Through the windows, she glimpsed more men patrolling the grounds, their weapons no longer concealed. Isabella spent the morning exploring the house, testing the boundaries of her imprisonment. The library contained thousands of books, many in Italian, all organized with military precision. The kitchen was a temple to culinary arts, staffed by people who treated her with polite deference, but watched her every move. The garden was beautiful but surrounded by walls topped with surveillance equipment. It was in the afternoon, while reading in a sun-drenched conservatory, that Isabella heard the commotion. Shouting voices, car engines, the slam of doors. She moved to the window and saw Alessandro returning. But something was wrong. He was walking differently, favoring his left side, and there were dark stains on his white shirt. Marco and 2 other men flanked him as they entered the house, their expressions grim. Isabella found herself moving toward the main foyer before she consciously decided to do so. "Sir, you need medical attention," Marco was saying as they climbed the stairs. "It's just a graze. I'll be fine. With respect, you're bleeding all over the carpet." Isabella stepped forward, her nursing instincts overriding her fear and anger. "I can help." All 4 men turned to look at her, surprise flickering across their faces. Alessandro's eyes met hers, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. Under all that power and authority, he was just a man who was hurt and trying not to show it. "You don't have to," he began. "Yes, I do." Isabella moved closer, studying the way he held himself, the pallor beneath his olive skin. "Where are you hit?" "Left shoulder. Bullet grazed me during the warehouse inspection." Isabella looked at Marco. "I need medical supplies. Antiseptic, gauze, surgical thread if you have it." "The medical kit is in his office," Marco replied, already moving. "Bring it to his room, and I'll need clean towels, hot water, and good lighting." As they helped Alessandro to his private quarters, Isabella felt a strange shift inside her. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she wasn't a prisoner or a burden. She was needed, useful, doing something she was trained for. Alessandro's bedroom was as luxurious as the rest of the house, but she barely noticed the expensive furnishings. Her focus was entirely on the man sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to remove his ruined shirt without jarring his injured shoulder. "Let me," Isabella said softly, moving to help him. Their eyes met as she carefully peeled the fabric away from the wound, and Isabella felt something electric pass between them. This close, she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the small scar along his jawline, the way his breath hitched when her fingers accidentally brushed against undamaged skin. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. This is going to hurt." As Isabella began cleaning the wound, Alessandro remained perfectly still, though she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the edge of the bed. When she began stitching, he finally spoke. "You don't have to do this." Marco could have called a doctor who would ask questions, report a gunshot wound. Isabella concentrated on her work, trying to ignore how close they were, how intimate this felt. Besides, this is what I'm trained for. It's what I love doing. Helping people, healing them, fixing what's broken. She tied off the last stitch and began bandaging the wound. Even when they've been shot doing illegal things in warehouses they probably shouldn't own. Alessandro's laugh was soft and unexpected. Fair point. As Isabella finished her work, their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. The room seemed to shrink around them, filled with unspoken tension and possibilities. Isabella found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the strength in his hands. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes? I'm sorry. About your uncle. About your life being turned upside down. About everything. If there had been any other way..." She pressed her fingers gently against his lips, stopping his words. Don't apologize for saving my life, even if you destroyed it in the process." Alessandro caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." In that moment, surrounded by luxury that felt less like a prison and more like sanctuary, Isabella realized something that terrified her more than any external threat. She was beginning to trust the dangerous man who held her fate in his hands. And even worse, she was beginning to want him. The attack came at 3 a.m, shattering the illusion of safety that had begun to settle over Isabella like a comfortable blanket. She woke to the sound of automatic gunfire echoing through the mansion's corridors, followed by shouts in languages she didn't recognize, and the heavy footsteps of men moving with military precision. Isabella pressed herself against the bedroom wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give away her position. Through the French doors leading to her balcony, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the gardens like deadly fireflies. The perfectly manicured grounds had become a battlefield, with Alessandro's security forces engaged in fierce combat against intruders who had somehow breached the estate's defenses. The door to her room burst open without warning, and Isabella bit back a scream as a figure in tactical gear filled the doorway. For a terrifying moment, she thought the attackers had reached her, but then she recognized Marco's voice beneath the black mask. "Miss Santos, we need to move. Now." Isabella didn't argue. She grabbed the robe Alessandro had provided, silk, and probably worth more than her monthly rent, and followed Marco into the corridor. The mansion felt different in the darkness, transformed from a luxury prison into something that resembled a war zone. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, and the sound of combat echoed from multiple directions. "Where's Alessandro?" she asked, as Marco led her down a hallway she'd never seen before, coordinating the defense from the main security center. "He wanted you moved to the safe room until this is over." The safe room turned out to be a reinforced bunker, hidden behind a bookshelf in Alessandro's study. The space was larger than Isabella had expected, equipped with communication equipment, medical supplies, and enough food and water to last for days. But what struck her most was the wall of monitors showing every angle of the estate's grounds. On screen after screen, she watched the battle unfold. Alessandro's men moved like a well-trained army, using the estate's layout to their advantage as they engaged the attackers. But the intruders were professional too. Their movements coordinated, their equipment military-grade. This wasn't some random attempt at robbery or revenge. This was a calculated assault by people who had studied the Romano defenses and planned accordingly. Russians, Marco said, following her gaze to the monitors. Petrov's elite strike team. They've been planning this for weeks. Isabella watched one monitor that showed Alessandro himself, dressed in tactical gear and carrying an assault rifle with the same casual confidence other men might carry a briefcase. He moved through the combat zone like he was born to it, directing his forces with hand signals and taking out enemies with precision shots that spoke of extensive military training. He's good at this, Isabella murmured, surprised by the observation. The best I've ever seen. Alessandro didn't inherit his position. He earned it in situations exactly like this one. Marco checked his weapon while monitoring the communications equipment. But Petrov's people are good too. This won't be over quickly. As if summoned by his words, the lights in the safe room flickered and went out, leaving them in darkness broken only by the glow of the monitors. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but the brief blackout felt like an omen. They're trying to cut power to the main house, Marco explained, speaking into his headset in rapid Italian before switching back to English. Alessandro's moving to the backup generator room. If they take out our power completely, we lose the security systems. Isabella found herself gripping the edge of the desk as she watched Alessandro disappear from one monitor and reappear on another, moving through the mansion's lower levels with two other men flanking him. The basement corridors looked different from the rest of the house, more utilitarian, designed for function rather than beauty. Marco, she said quietly, what my uncle owed money for. Was it really just gambling debts? Marco glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. What makes you ask that? This. Isabella gestured at the monitors showing the ongoing battle. This level of response. The resources Petrov is willing to commit. People don't launch military operations over gambling debts. Marco was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much truth to share. Your uncle was involved in more than gambling, Miss Santos. He was smuggling medical supplies, stolen from hospitals, resold on the black market. Petrov used those supplies to patch up his soldiers after operations. The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. Medical supplies? Surgical equipment, pharmaceuticals, blood products. Things that are difficult to obtain without proper credentials. Marco's voice was gentle but firm. Your uncle knew you were studying nursing. He planned to use your access to expand the operation once you graduated. Isabella sank into a chair, the weight of this knowledge pressing down on her like a physical burden. Her uncle hadn't just been gambling. He had been stealing medical supplies that could have saved lives, selling them to criminals who used them to continue their violent operations. And he had planned to drag her into it. Alessandro knew, she asked quietly. He's known for weeks. It's one of the reasons he's been watching you, to determine if you were involved, or if you could be used against your will. On the monitors, the battle was intensifying. Isabella watched Alessandro and his team reach the generator room, only to find it already occupied by Petrov's men. What followed was a close-quarters firefight that made her stomach clench with anxiety. She found herself holding her breath every time Alessandro appeared in the frame, releasing it only when she saw him move safely to the next position. He's been protecting me from the beginning, Isabella realized, even before the gala. Yes, but tonight changes everything. Petrov isn't just trying to collect a debt anymore, he's trying to eliminate a witness and send a message to Alessandro. This is about territory, power, control. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off longer before the backup power engaged. On the monitors, Isabella could see that Alessandro's team had secured the generator room, but the victory had come at a cost. One of his men was down, and Alessandro himself was moving differently, favoring his right leg in a way that suggested injury. He's hurt, Isabella said, starting to rise from her chair. Marco caught her arm. He's handled worse, and you're safer here. I'm a nursing student, Marco. If he's injured, I can help. If you leave this room and something happens to you, Alessandro will burn down half the city in revenge. Petrov is counting on emotional responses. Don't give him what he wants. Isabella wanted to argue, but the logic was undeniable. Instead, she focused on the monitors, tracking Alessandro's progress as he and his remaining team member fought their way back toward the main house. The attacking force was retreating, but they were doing so in organized fashion. This hadn't been a desperate gamble, but a calculated probe of Alessandro's defenses. It was another hour before the all-clear signal came through Marco's headset. The mansion fell into an eerie quiet broken only by the distant sound of sirens, emergency services that would arrive to find nothing more than a gas leak explosion that had damaged some landscaping. When Alessandro finally appeared in the safe room doorway, Isabella's breath caught in her throat. His tactical gear was torn and blood-stained. His face was smudged with smoke and dirt, and there was a grimness in his eyes that spoke of violence recently committed. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered to her in that moment. "Status report," he said to Marco, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "Perimeter secured. 4 attackers down, 3 captured, the rest retreated. We lost Jensen and Rodriguez is in surgery." Alessandro nodded grimly. "And her?" "Safe. Never left this room." Only then did Alessandro's gaze shift to Isabella, and she saw something change in his expression. Relief so profound it was almost physical. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and pulled her into his arms without a word, holding her against his chest with a desperation that spoke louder than any declaration. Isabella melted into his embrace, breathing in the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she felt completely safe, not because of the walls or the guards or the security systems, but because of the man holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "I thought—" Alessandro started, then stopped, his voice rough with emotions he was struggling to control. "I'm okay," Isabella whispered against his chest. "We're both okay." Alessandro pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands framing her cheeks with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone who had just been engaged in lethal combat. "Isabella, I need you to understand something. After tonight, there's no going back. Petrov has declared war, and that means—" She silenced him by pressing her lips to his. A kiss born of adrenaline and fear and the overwhelming relief of survival. Alessandro stiffened in surprise for a moment, before responding with a hunger that matched her own, his arms tightening around her, as if he could protect her from the entire world through sheer force of will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella looked directly into his storm-gray eyes and made her choice. "I'm in danger because of you," she said quietly. "But I'm alive because of you too. I choose you, Alessandro. I choose this life, whatever it brings." Alessandro searched her face for any sign of doubt or fear, finding instead a determination that matched his own. "You know what that means? What this world will demand of you? I'm learning. And I'm stronger than you think." Alessandro's smile was fierce and proud, and tinged with something that might have been love. "Yes, you are." Outside the safe room, the Romano Empire was regrouping, preparing for whatever Petrov's next move might bring. But inside that reinforced bunker, 2 people who had found each other in the middle of a war sealed their fate with another kiss, one that tasted of gunpowder and promises, and a future neither of them could fully imagine, but both were willing to fight for. The discovery came 3 days after the attack, hidden in Alessandro's private office behind a painting of his grandfather. Isabella had been looking for medical supplies to restock the estate's first aid stations when she accidentally triggered the hidden mechanism. What she found changed everything she thought she knew about her place in Alessandro's world. The secret room contained surveillance equipment, communication devices, and most damning of all, detailed files on every person in Alessandro's organization, including a thick folder marked with her uncle's name and another bearing her own. But it wasn't just the existence of these files that shattered her fragile trust. It was what they contained. Isabella's hands shook as she opened her own file, finding photographs dating back months before the gala. Images of her leaving her apartment, walking to class, working at the hospital where she did her nursing practicum. Someone had been documenting her entire life with methodical precision, creating a comprehensive profile that included her class schedules, work patterns, and even her favorite coffee shop. But it was the notation in Alessandro's handwriting that made her blood run cold. Potential asset. Nursing background useful for medical operations. Uncle's debts provide leverage. Approach with caution. Asset. She had been nothing more than a useful tool from the very beginning. The sound of footsteps in the corridor sent Isabella scrambling to replace everything exactly as she'd found it, but she wasn't fast enough. Alessandro appeared in the doorway of his office just as she was closing her file, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness as he realized what she had discovered. Isabella. His voice was carefully controlled, revealing nothing of what he was thinking. She turned to face him, the file still clutched in her hands like evidence of betrayal. How long? The question came out as barely a whisper. How long were you watching me before the gala? Alessandro stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of inevitability, as if this moment had always been coming. 6 weeks. The admission hit her like a physical blow. 6 weeks. You were planning this. All of this. From the beginning. Not all of it. Alessandro moved closer, but stopped when Isabella took a step back. Your uncle's situation created an opportunity, yes. But what happened at the gala? What developed between us? That was never part of any plan. Isabella laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the office walls. What developed between us? You mean my usefulness as a medical consultant for your criminal empire? That's not... Don't. Isabella held up her hand, stopping his words. Don't you dare try to tell me this wasn't calculated. I've read the file, Alessandro. I know exactly what you think of me. Alessandro's jaw tightened, his careful composure cracking slightly. You know what I thought of you 6 weeks ago. Before I knew you. Before I understood. Before you understood what? That I could be manipulated more effectively with kindness than with threats. Before I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Isabella stared at Alessandro's face, searching for any sign of deception, any indication that this was just another manipulation tactic. What she saw instead was raw vulnerability, the kind that a man like Alessandro would never fake because it exposed too much of his true self. Love, Isabella repeated, her voice hollow. Is that what you call this? Keeping files on me like I'm some kind of criminal? Having me followed and photographed like a target? Alessandro ran his hands through his dark hair, his usual perfect composure completely abandoned. It was surveillance, yes. But not for the reasons you think. Then explain it to me. Explain how stalking me was some kind of protection. Your uncle wasn't just in debt to Petrov, Alessandro said, his voice strained. He was feeding information to the Russians about hospital security systems, medical supply storage, pharmaceutical shipment schedules. He was setting up an operation that would use your access as a nursing student to steal controlled substances and medical equipment on an industrial scale. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. Is it? Think about it, Isabella. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way he always needed money but never explained why. The connections he claimed to have with hospital administrators, despite never working in healthcare himself. The pieces began falling into place with horrible clarity. Uncle Thomas's insistence that she pursue nursing school specifically at Columbia. His sudden interest in her clinical rotations, always asking detailed questions about hospital procedures and supply management. The job applications he had encouraged her to fill out for positions at specific medical facilities. He was grooming me, Isabella whispered, the realization hitting her like ice water. From the day you started nursing school. Maybe even before that. Alessandro's voice was gentler now, but still carried the weight of painful truth. The operation was designed to unfold gradually over years. By the time you realized what was happening, you would have been too deeply involved to escape. Isabella sank into a chair, her legs no longer capable of supporting her weight. Everything she had thought she knew about her relationship with her uncle, about her own choices and aspirations, had been a carefully constructed lie. How did you know? She asked quietly. Marco discovered the connection during routine intelligence gathering about Petrov's operations. We've been tracking medical supply theft rings for months. They're increasingly common revenue streams for organized crime. When your uncle's name appeared in our investigation, I ordered surveillance to determine your level of involvement. Alessandro moved closer, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. I expected to find a willing accomplice, someone already corrupted by greed or desperation. What I found instead was a woman working 3 jobs to pay for school, volunteering at free clinics, completely innocent of her uncle's schemes. So you decided to use me anyway. No, I decided to protect you. Alessandro's eyes met hers, and she could see the truth of his words reflected there. The surveillance was to determine when and how Petrov would try to activate the network. I was planning to neutralize the threat and remove you from danger before you ever knew it existed. Isabella wanted to believe him, but trust felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. And the gala? That was just coincidence? Alessandro was quiet for a long moment before answering. The gala was supposed to be reconnaissance. I was meeting with contacts to gather more information about Petrov's timeline. You were supposed to be safely at home that night, but I wasn't. No, you picked up an extra shift, worked an event that put you in the middle of something you should never have witnessed. Everything after that, Alessandro reached out tentatively, touching her hand. Everything after that was improvisation, trying to keep you alive in a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. Isabella looked down at his hand covering hers, remembering how that same touch had comforted her during the darkest moments of the past weeks. The protection, the safe room, even the medical supplies. It was all planned. The infrastructure was already in place, yes, but not for you specifically. Alessandro's thumb traced gentle circles on her skin. I have a dozen safe houses, multiple backup plans for every operation. What wasn't planned was caring about whether you lived or died. The admission hung between them like a confession. Isabella studied Alessandro's face, seeing past the careful control to the man beneath, someone who had built his life around calculating odds and minimizing risk, now completely undone by an emotion he had never expected to feel. I don't know how to trust you, Isabella said quietly. I don't know how to separate what's real from what's manipulation. Then don't trust me yet. Alessandro's voice was rough with emotion. But don't run either. Give us time to figure out what this is without the weight of my mistakes crushing us both. Isabella pulled her hand away from his, needing physical distance to think clearly. Us. There is no us, Alessandro. There's you, and there's me, and there's a situation you created by involving me in your war with Petrov. You think I wanted this? Alessandro stood abruptly, his carefully maintained control finally snapping. You think I wanted to fall in love with someone I was supposed to be protecting from a distance? Someone whose very existence puts my organization at risk? Then let me go. I can't. The words came out raw, desperate. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, it's too late. Petrov knows about you now. He knows you matter to me. Releasing you would be signing your death warrant. Isabella stood as well, pacing to the window that overlooked the estate's gardens. Outside, she could see Alessandro's men patrolling the grounds, their presence a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them both. So I'm trapped. Forever. You're protected. There's a difference. Isabella turned back to face him, tears threatening but refusing to fall. Is there? Because from where I stand, it looks like I've traded one prison for another. At least with Uncle Thomas, I knew I was being used. The words hit Alessandro like physical blows, and Isabella could see the pain they caused reflected in his eyes, but she was past the point of sparing his feelings. Her entire life had been built on lies and manipulations, and she was tired of pretending otherwise. I need time, she said finally. I need space to think about all of this without you watching my every move, analyzing my reactions, planning your next approach. Alessandro nodded slowly, though she could see how much the admission cost him. How much time? I don't know. Maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe forever. Isabella. No. Her voice was firm, final. You've made your choice about how to handle this situation. Now let me make mine. Alessandro stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella could see him weighing options, calculating responses, falling back into the strategic mindset that had kept him alive in a world of constant danger. When he spoke again, his voice had returned to the carefully controlled tone she remembered from their first meeting. Very well. But you'll remain on the estate grounds. The threat from Petrov hasn't changed, regardless of your feelings about my methods. Of course it hasn't, Isabella said bitterly. Nothing ever changes in your world, does it? Just the strategies for dealing with it. She walked past him toward the door, but his voice stopped her before she could leave. For what it's worth, Isabella, I never meant for you to be hurt by this. I thought I could protect you without your ever knowing the truth. Isabella paused without turning around. That's the problem, Alessandro. You thought you could control everything, including me. And some things can't be controlled, no matter how much power you have. As she left Alessandro's office, Isabella felt the weight of her new reality settling around her like armor. She was trapped in a world she had never chosen, protected by a man who had manipulated her from the beginning, surrounded by dangers she was only beginning to understand. But for the first time since arriving at the Romano estate, she was choosing her own path forward. Even if that path led through a wilderness of uncertainty and pain, it would be hers to walk. 2 weeks of silence stretched between Isabella and Alessandro like a chasm neither knew how to cross. Isabella spent her days exploring the estate's extensive grounds, reading in the library, and pointedly avoiding any area where she might encounter the man who had turned her world upside down. Alessandro, according to Marco's careful updates, threw himself into business with renewed intensity, conducting meetings that lasted until dawn and taking risks that made his security team nervous. It was the sound of helicopters that shattered their carefully maintained distance. Isabella looked up from her book as the rhythmic thrum of rotor blades filled the air above the estate. Through the conservatory windows, she watched 3 black helicopters circle the property before landing on the mansion's expansive lawn. Men in tactical gear poured out. But these weren't Alessandro's soldiers. Their movements were different, more aggressive, and they carried weapons she didn't recognize. Marco burst into the conservatory, his usually calm demeanor replaced by urgent concern. Miss Santos, we need to move immediately. Mr. Romano's location has been compromised. What's happening? Isabella set down her book, adrenaline already flooding her system. Petrov found Alessandro's meeting with the Colombians. They've taken the warehouse district, and Alessandro's team is outnumbered 3-1. Marco was already moving toward the door, speaking rapidly into his headset. He's requesting immediate backup, but our response time puts him at serious risk. Isabella followed Marco through corridors that had become as familiar as her old apartment, but now felt charged with desperate energy. How did Petrov find out about the meeting? Marco's expression darkened. We believe there's a leak in our organization. Someone with access to Alessandro's schedule and security protocols. They reached Alessandro's private office, where banks of monitors showed the unfolding crisis in real time. Isabella could see the warehouse district under siege, explosions lighting up the night sky, gunfire echoing through the feeds, Alessandro's men pinned down in what appeared to be a coordinated ambush. There, Marco pointed to one monitor showing a figure moving between shipping containers, directing his forces with hand signals. Even at this distance, Isabella could recognize Alessandro's movements, the way he carried himself even under fire. He's trapped, she breathed, watching as enemy positions closed in around Alessandro's location. The extraction team won't reach him for another 20 minutes. By then, Marco didn't finish the sentence, but Isabella could see the math in his grim expression. Isabella stared at the monitors, her mind racing through possibilities. What about the medical supply route? Marco looked confused. What medical supply route? The one my uncle was involved with. The network Petrov was using to move stolen medical equipment. Isabella's nursing training kicked in, analyzing the tactical situation like a complex medical case. If Uncle Thomas was providing information about hospital security systems, there has to be a route through the medical district that Petrov doesn't know you know about. Marco's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The emergency services tunnels. Isabella nodded, pieces falling into place with startling clarity. My uncle had blueprints of the hospital district in his apartment. I saw them when we cleaned out his things. He was mapping service tunnels that connect medical facilities to the warehouse district. Routes designed for emergency supply deliveries. Routes that bypass Petrov's surveillance network. Marco finished, his expression shifting from desperation to hope. I know those tunnels, Isabella said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. I've used them during my nursing rotations at Metro General. They run directly under the warehouse district. Marco was already reaching for his phone, but Isabella caught his arm. Marco, Alessandro will never approve a plan that puts me at risk. Then we don't tell him until it's too late to stop us. The decision was made in that moment. Born of desperation and a love Isabella had been trying to deny for 2 weeks. She wasn't going to lose Alessandro to Petrov's ambition, regardless of how complicated their relationship had become. 20 minutes later, Isabella found herself in the passenger seat of an armored vehicle, wearing tactical gear that had been hastily adjusted to fit her smaller frame. Marco drove with the focused intensity of a man whose loyalty had been tested by impossible circumstances. The tunnel entrance is through the Metro General loading dock, Isabella explained, studying maps on a tablet. From there, we can reach the warehouse district without being detected. But we'll be going in blind. No communication with Alessandro's team until we're in position. And if Petrov's men have found the tunnels, Isabella checked the medical kit she had insisted on bringing. Then we improvise. The loading dock was deserted, except for a skeleton crew of night shift maintenance workers who recognized Isabella from her rotations. A few carefully crafted lies about emergency medical supplies got them access to the service tunnels without questions. The tunnels were exactly as Isabella remembered. Utilitarian concrete passages lined with pipes and electrical conduits, wide enough for service vehicles but cramped for tactical movement. Their footsteps echoed despite their attempts at stealth, and the air carried the stale scent of disinfectant and industrial cleaning solutions. "How did you know about these?" Marco asked as they navigated a particularly narrow section. Nursing students learn all the hospital's systems, including emergency protocols for moving critical supplies during disasters. These tunnels connect every major medical facility in the district to ensure continuity of care even during infrastructure failures. They moved in focused silence for another 10 minutes before Isabella held up her hand, stopping their forward progress. Through the concrete walls, she could hear the muffled sound of gunfire growing louder. "We're directly under the warehouse district now," she whispered, consulting her mental map of the tunnel system. "There should be an access point about 50 meters ahead that connects to the warehouse basement levels." Marco nodded, speaking quietly into his headset. "Base, this is Marco. We're in position for extraction support. What's Alessandro's current location?" The response crackled through their earpieces. "Warehouse 7, main floor, pinned down behind shipping containers. Enemy forces have him surrounded. ETA for backup still 15 minutes. Isabella felt her heart clench as she imagined Alessandro trapped and outnumbered, fighting for his life while she moved through tunnels beneath his feet. The woman who had been avoiding him for 2 weeks suddenly couldn't bear the thought of a world without him in it. "Marco, I need you to understand something," she said quietly, as they approached the access point. "Whatever happens up there, whatever Alessandro and I work out between us afterward, I choose this. I choose him. I choose this life." Marco studied her face in the dim tunnel lighting, seeing something that made him nod with satisfaction. "He's going to be furious that we brought you into combat. Let him be furious. He can yell at me when we get him out of there alive." The access point was a maintenance ladder leading up to a concealed entrance in Warehouse 6, one building over from Alessandro's position. Isabella climbed first, using skills she had developed during nursing school emergency drills, while Marco followed with the tactical equipment they would need. The warehouse basement was dark and filled with the scent of motor oil and metal, but Isabella could hear the battle raging one floor above them. Through service corridors designed for moving supplies between connected buildings, they made their way toward Warehouse 7. "Isabella," Marco's voice stopped her as they reached a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "Once we go through this door, there's no going back." "Are you certain about this choice?" Isabella thought about Alessandro's face when he told her he loved her, about the way he had held her during the first attack on the estate, about the careful gentleness in his hands when he touched her despite all the violence those same hands were capable of. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Marco opened the door, revealing a staircase that led up to the main warehouse floor. Above them, the sound of gunfire was punctuated by shouts in multiple languages and the crash of metal against concrete. "Stay close, stay low, and when I give the signal, run directly toward Alessandro's position. Don't stop for anything." Isabella nodded, her medical training taking over as adrenaline sharpened her focus to laser intensity. She was no longer the frightened woman who had been taken from the Gala. She was someone who had chosen her path with full knowledge of the consequences. As they climbed toward the battle above, Isabella felt the last of her resistance to Alessandro's world fall away. She wasn't being pulled into his life of violence and danger. She was diving in willingly, completely, irrevocably, because some choices, once made with full heart and clear eyes, changed everything that came after. The woman who emerged from those tunnels would be different from the one who had descended into them. And Alessandro Romano, if they could reach him in time, would discover that the nursing student he had fallen in love with had transformed into something far more dangerous. A partner who would fight beside him against any enemy, no matter the cost. The warehouse floor erupted into chaos as Isabella and Marco emerged from the basement access point. Smoke filled the air from burning shipping containers, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of blood. Through the haze, Isabella could see Alessandro's position, a defensive cluster behind overturned crates near the far wall, surrounded by Petrov's advancing forces. "Isabella, what the hell are you doing here?" Alessandro's voice crackled through Marco's radio, fury and terror warring in his tone as he spotted them across the battlefield. "Saving your stubborn ass," Isabella replied, grabbing the radio from Marco before he could stop her. "We found a way out through the medical tunnels, but we need to reach you first." "Absolutely not. You get back underground and—" His words were cut off by an explosion that shook the entire building as Petrov's men launched grenades toward Alessandro's position. Isabella watched in horror as debris rained down around the shipping containers, and for several heart-stopping moments, there was silence from Alessandro's radio. "Alessandro!" Isabella's scream echoed through the warehouse, raw with panic. "I'm here." His voice returned, strained but alive. "But we're running low on ammunition and they've got us completely surrounded. Marco, get her out of here." "No." Isabella's voice carried absolute finality. "We're coming to you. All of us." Before Marco could object, Isabella was moving, using her knowledge of hospital emergency protocols to navigate the smoke-filled warehouse. She had learned to move efficiently through chaos during medical crisis simulations, and those skills translated perfectly to this urban battlefield. "Follow my lead," she told Marco, staying low as they moved between burning containers. "In medical emergencies, we use a technique called controlled movement through hazardous environments. The key is to move decisively, but never expose yourself for more than 3 seconds at a time." Marco, despite his years of tactical training, found himself following Isabella's guidance as she led them through the maze of obstacles toward Alessandro's position. She moved with surprising confidence, pausing to assess each route before committing, reading the flow of battle like a medical professional, reading vital signs. They were halfway across the warehouse floor when Isabella heard it. A sound that made her blood freeze, the distinctive whine of an RPG being loaded. "RPG, southeast corner," she shouted into the radio, her medical training having taught her to remain calm and communicate clearly during life-threatening situations. Alessandro's response came immediately. "I see it. All units, incoming explosive." The rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the warehouse, aimed directly at Alessandro's defensive position. Isabella watched in slow motion as death approached the man she loved, and something inside her snapped with crystalline clarity. Without conscious thought, Isabella broke from cover, sprinting toward Alessandro's position with speed born of pure desperation. She reached his location just as the explosion detonated against the shipping containers, the blast wave throwing her against Alessandro's body and sending them both tumbling behind a concrete support pillar. "Isabella!" Alessandro caught her as they hit the ground, his hands immediately checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Tell me you're not hurt." "I'm fine," she gasped, though her ears were ringing and her vision was slightly blurred. "But your shoulder is bleeding again." Alessandro looked down to see blood seeping through his tactical vest where his previous wound had reopened. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." Isabella was already reaching for her medical kit, her training overriding the chaos around them. "You're going into shock, and if you lose any more blood—" "Isabella, listen to me." Alessandro grabbed her hands, his eyes intense with desperate love and fear. "I need you to understand something. If we don't make it out of here, we're making it out." Isabella interrupted firmly, beginning to treat his wound with efficient movements. "All of us, together. A new voice cut through the battle sounds, cold and accented with Russian inflection. How touching. The Mafia prince and his little nurse, dying together in the dirt. Isabella looked up to see Viktor Petrov emerging from the smoke, flanked by 6 heavily armed men. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 40, with pale blue eyes and the kind of smile that suggested he enjoyed causing pain. Petrov. Alessandro's voice carried deadly calm as he positioned himself protectively in front of Isabella. You want me? You have me. Let her go. Oh, but she's the interesting one, isn't she? Petrov's gaze fixed on Isabella with predatory interest. The woman who brought down my medical supply operation, the one who cost me millions in lost revenue. Isabella felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. My uncle wasn't just providing information, he was the inside source for your entire network. Very good. Thomas Santos was our gateway into the hospital system, until you started asking inconvenient questions about his activities. When he tried to back out of our arrangement, well, Petrov shrugged. Loyalty is so important in business relationships. Alessandro's body tensed like a coiled spring. You killed him because Isabella was getting too close to the truth. I killed him because he became unreliable, just like you're about to become. The standoff stretched taut as wire, with Petrov's men maintaining their weapons aimed at Isabella and Alessandro. Around them, the warehouse had fallen into an eerie quiet as both sides waited to see how this final confrontation would play out. That's when Isabella heard it, the soft click of a safety being disengaged, coming from behind Petrov's position. Marco had used the distraction to flank them, moving with the silent expertise that made him Alessandro's most trusted lieutenant. But Petrov heard it too. The Russian crime lord spun toward the sound, his weapon tracking toward Marco's position. In that moment of divided attention, Isabella saw her opportunity and took it with the decisive action that had carried her through medical emergencies. She lunged forward, driving the surgical scissors from her medical kit directly into Petrov's gun arm. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Petrov screamed in pain and surprise. "Now, Alessandro!" Isabella shouted. What followed was a symphony of violence orchestrated by Alessandro Romano at his most lethal. He moved like death personified, his weapon speaking with mechanical precision as he eliminated Petrov's men in seconds. Marco's covering fire from the flank position caught the survivors in a crossfire that left no room for escape or surrender. When the shooting stopped, only Petrov remained alive, clutching his wounded arm and staring at Isabella with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "My organization spans 3 countries. Killing me will only send a message to every other criminal who thinks they can threaten what's mine," Alessandro finished, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a man who had built an empire on the foundation of decisive action. The single gunshot echoed through the warehouse with finality. Isabella stared at Petrov's lifeless body, feeling strangely detached from what had just occurred. She had imagined this moment would feel different, more traumatic, more overwhelming. Instead, she felt only a profound sense of completion, as if a chapter of her life had finally closed. "Isabella." Alessandro's voice was soft, uncertain. "Are you all right?" She turned to look at him. This dangerous, powerful man who had turned her world upside down and then fought beside her to put the pieces back together in an entirely new configuration. "I killed someone tonight," she said quietly. "You saved lives tonight. Mine, Marco's, probably your own." Isabella nodded slowly, understanding that this was her new reality. In Alessandro's world, violence wasn't senseless. It was surgical, purposeful, a tool used to protect what mattered most. "I'm not the same person who walked into that gala," she said. Alessandro stepped closer, his eyes searching her face for any sign of regret or fear. "No, you're not. The question is, who are you now?" Isabella looked around the warehouse, at the evidence of battle, at Marco coordinating with Alessandro's arriving reinforcements, at the empire they had fought to preserve. When she met Alessandro's gaze again, her voice carried absolute certainty. "I'm someone who chooses you. Someone who chooses this life. Someone who will fight beside you against anyone who threatens what we're building together." Alessandro's smile was fierce with pride and love and relief. "Then welcome to your new world, Isabella Romano. The name hit her like a promise, and a challenge wrapped in silk and steel. As sirens wailed in the distance, and Alessandro's men secured the area, Isabella realized that the woman who had bandaged a stranger's wounds that first night had become someone capable of ending lives to protect the people she loved. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and absolutely right. 6 months after Viktor Petrov's death, Isabella Romano stood on the balcony of the penthouse suite overlooking Manhattan's financial district, her hands resting protectively over the gentle curve of her belly. The morning sun caught the diamonds in her wedding ring, a ring that had been placed on her finger in a private ceremony attended only by Marco and the estate's chapel priest, sealing a union that had been forged in blood and strengthened by choice. The transformation was complete in ways she couldn't have imagined that night at the gala. Isabella Romano. She had legally changed her surname within a week of Petrov's elimination. Now oversaw a network of medical facilities that served both the legitimate community and Alessandro's organization. The Romano Medical Foundation operated 12 clinics throughout the city, providing health care to underserved populations while serving as perfect cover for the more clandestine medical services required by those in Alessandro's world. Mrs. Romano. Marco's voice came from the doorway, carrying the respect that had replaced his initial wariness. The board meeting is ready to begin. Isabella turned from the view, her hand automatically smoothing over the flowing silk dress that concealed her 4-month pregnancy. The boardroom of Romano Industries had become as familiar to her as any hospital she had worked in, though the business conducted here involved considerably more risk than patient care. The mahogany table was surrounded by men and women who represented the various arms of Alessandro's empire, legitimate businesses that generated billions in revenue, providing perfect cover for operations that existed in the shadows. Isabella had learned to read the subtle dynamics of these meetings, understanding that her presence served multiple purposes beyond her medical expertise. Status report on the medical supply distribution, Alessandro said as she took her seat beside him, his hand briefly touching hers in acknowledgement. Even in business meetings, he couldn't completely suppress his protective instincts toward her and their unborn child. Revenues are up 30% from last quarter, reported Maria Santos, the financial director who had replaced the recently deceased Thomas. No relation to Isabella's uncle, despite the shared surname. The legitimate pharmaceutical partnerships are providing excellent cover for our specialized services, and we've expanded into 3 new territories without opposition. Isabella listened with the focused attention she had once reserved for medical lectures, understanding that this world operated on the same principles as any complex system. Every component had to function perfectly for the whole to survive. Her medical background had proven invaluable in ways she hadn't anticipated, bringing both legitimacy and practical skills to an organization that frequently required discretion in healthcare matters. The Bratva remnants? Alessandro asked, his voice carrying the casual tone he used to discuss matters that could result in significant violence. Neutralized as of Tuesday. Marco replied with equal calm. The last of Petrov's lieutenants tried to restart operations in Brooklyn. They won't be trying again. Isabella felt no revulsion at this casual discussion of elimination. The woman who had been horrified by violence 6 months ago had learned to distinguish between necessary and gratuitous brutality. Petrov's organization had been a cancer that required surgical removal, and she had become skilled at surgical procedures in more ways than one. Good. What about the expansion into the pharmaceutical research sector? Doctor, Romano has established partnerships with 3 major research hospitals, Maria reported, using Isabella's new professional title with the ease that came from months of practice. The drug trials provide perfect justification for our chemical acquisitions, and the research partnerships give us access to experimental treatments that have proven valuable for our special clientele. Alessandro's smile held the satisfaction of a man whose strategic vision was bearing fruit beyond his original plans. Isabella's integration into his empire hadn't just legitimized certain operations, it had opened entirely new revenue streams and operational possibilities. Speaking of special clientele, Marco continued, the request from the Sicilian families has been approved. They're willing to pay premium rates for our medical services during their expansion into the northeastern ports. Isabella nodded, understanding that medical services in this context meant everything from trauma surgery performed in untraceable locations to the provision of pharmaceutical products that couldn't be obtained through conventional channels. The Romano Medical Network had become the Switzerland of criminal health care. Neutral, discreet, and absolutely reliable. "Mrs. Romano, there's also the matter of the new recruitment program," Maria said, consulting her notes. "Your nursing school contacts have provided us with a dozen potential candidates for our specialized training program." This was Isabella's particular contribution to the family business, identifying nursing students and young doctors who possessed both the skills and the discretion necessary to work within Alessandro's organization. The program provided excellent benefits and career advancement opportunities in exchange for absolute loyalty and selective blindness regarding patient backgrounds. "The screening process will take another month," Isabella replied. "We can't afford any risks with personnel who will have access to sensitive information." Alessandro's eyes met hers across the table, and she could see the pride and love that had never diminished despite the transformation she had undergone. If anything, his feelings had intensified as he watched her evolve from protected asset to equal partner in building their empire. The meeting concluded with the usual efficiency that characterized Romano operations, but Alessandro gestured for Isabella to remain as the others filed out. When they were alone, his businessman's mask fell away, replaced by the gentle concern that had become familiar over the months of their marriage. "How are you feeling?" His hand moved to her belly, still amazed by the miracle growing there. Their first child, conceived during the passionate reconciliation that had followed their victory over Petrov. Strong, healthy, ready for whatever comes next. Isabella covered his hand with hers, feeling the flutter of movement that had become more pronounced in recent weeks. "Our daughter is going to be born into a world where she'll want for nothing." "Daughter?" Alessandro's eyebrows rose with surprise and delight. The ultrasound yesterday confirmed it. Isabella's smile held the joy she had discovered in planning for their future together. "Elena Romano, if you approve of the name." "Elena," Alessandro repeated, his voice soft with wonder. "After my grandmother. She would have loved you, Isabella. You remind me of her. Beautiful, intelligent, and absolutely fierce when protecting family." Isabella leaned into his embrace, marveling at how natural this life had become. The penthouse apartment that served as their private residence within the Romano Tower was filled with evidence of their combined lives. Medical journals beside business reports, children's books in preparation for Elena's arrival, artwork that reflected both traditional Italian heritage and Isabella's more modern sensibilities. "Sometimes I think about that night at the Gala," Isabella said quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on Alessandro's chest. "How terrified I was. How certain that you were destroying my life. Do you regret any of it?" Isabella considered the question seriously, thinking about the woman she had been, struggling financially, alone, naive about the complexities of the world around her. That woman had possessed dreams of helping people through conventional medicine, of living a quiet, safe life that would honor her parents' memory. "No," she said finally, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "I regret nothing. That woman at the Gala was living half a life, surviving instead of truly living. You didn't destroy my life, Alessandro. You showed me what I was capable of becoming." Outside their windows, the city spread out beneath them like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and people, the Romano Empire conducted its business with the smooth efficiency that had made it legendary among those who operated in the shadows. Medical supplies moved through channels that existed parallel to legitimate commerce, serving clients who paid premium prices for discretion and reliability. Isabella Romano oversaw it all with the same precision she had once applied to patient care, understanding that the principles were identical: diagnosis, treatment, recovery, and above all, the protection of those under her care. "Elena is going to inherit an empire," Alessandro said, his voice filled with plans for their daughter's future. "She's going to inherit a choice." Isabella corrected gently, "The same choice you gave me, to decide what kind of person she wants to become." Alessandro's laugh was rich with appreciation for the woman his wife had become, someone who understood power but wasn't corrupted by it, who embraced their dangerous world while maintaining her own moral compass. As evening approached, they prepared for the formal dinner that would finalize the Romano family's expansion into European medical supply chains. Isabella dressed in a gown that accommodated her pregnancy while maintaining the elegance expected of the wife of a man like Alessandro Romano. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman transformed, not just physically, but in the confidence that radiated from every gesture. The dinner would be attended by representatives from families across 3 continents, all seeking to benefit from the medical expertise and discretion that had become the Romano signature. Isabella would charm them with her intelligence and professional credentials, while Alessandro negotiated the terms that would expand their influence even further. Later that night, as they lay in bed with Isabella's head resting on Alessandro's chest, she felt Elena moving restlessly, as if sensing the excitement in her parents' voices as they planned for the future. "What kind of world are we building for her?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. "A world where she'll never be powerless," Alessandro replied, his hand protective over their unborn daughter. "A world where she'll have every advantage we can provide, every protection we can arrange, every opportunity we can create, and the freedom to choose her own path. Always, just like her mother." Isabella smiled in the darkness, understanding that Elena Romano would be born into privilege beyond measure, but more importantly, into a family that understood the true nature of power, not just the ability to control others, but the wisdom to know when control was necessary and when it was destructive. The empire they had built together was more than criminal enterprise or legitimate business. It was a testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they chose to face the world as partners, equals, and ultimately, as a family that would endure whatever challenges lay ahead. Outside, the city never slept, and somewhere in its depths, the Romano organization continued its work, healing the wounded, supplying the desperate, and maintaining the delicate balance that kept their corner of the shadow world functioning with clockwork precision. Isabella Romano, formerly Santos, closed her eyes and felt her daughter stirring within her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new choices to make. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, beside the man who had shown her that some prisons were actually keys to freedom, and some dangers were worth embracing for the sake of love.